Okay, now, Carol Vorderman, famous for Rear of the Year, of course, and Countdown, well, she has quit her weekly BBC Radio Wales show, saying she will not be silenced by new social media rules for the organisation. After hosting the Saturday morning show on Radio Wales for the last 5 years, she has now said she won't continue and she's not prepared to lose her voice on social media. To all intents and purposes, the BBC said, we're going to axe you unless you go first. Well, joining me right now is Senior Fellow at the New Culture Forum. That's Rafe Heydel-Mankoo. Good afternoon to you. Also,
Pleasure.
Philip Ingram is still here as well, giving his tuppence worth on all the big stories. Rafe, I have to say, I find it extraordinary, some of the things that Carol Vorderman has actually been on social media saying. Really, I mean, not just, oh, I'm not sure about this policy, or I would like to support, say, the people of, of Palestine or whatever it is, but spouting, hate. I mean, vile, disgusting Tories want to get this government out, things like that. She's entitled to those views, but as we know, you're not entitled to hold those views whilst being paid by the licence fee, i.e. taxpayer, who work at the BBC. I mean, it's amazing that she's been there all this time, isn't it?
Yes, so actually I'm pleased that the BBC has finally solved its own countdown conundrum. what do we do with Carol Vorderman? Because you're quite right. She's fronting a programme that bears her own name, and that's a key point here. Even though they're basically just discussing what's your favourite walk on a Sunday afternoon on air, she's using her social media profile to fire Exocet missiles at anyone who's even closely linked to the Tory party. And, of course, we're paying her fees and her bills. But this goes far beyond Carol Vorderman, actually. But there is an actual viciousness and a nastiness to the way in which she has chosen to engage in this.
Anyone on the right, even vaguely on the right, I mean, the most sort of Ramonery Conservative MP or commentator who wrote those sorts of tweets on social media would be castigated by the left. She is celebrated, saying vile, disgusting Tories, hateful Tories. That's just bread and butter.
Well, and the thing that I want to talk about is the fact that we've now seen Joe Lycett, we've seen Alan Carr, Kelly Holmes, all coming out in support of her. And what really gets me is the fact that everything now has become so divisive.
Yeah.
I remember the days, I didn't know what Morecambe and Wise's political views were.
I know.
Frankie Howard, the two Ronnies, the whole nation could come together and watch these programmes.
And enjoy them.
And social cohesion came into being.
Look, I want people to be able to express their political views. I'm one of those people, as my poor now 17-year-old can testify, who thinks everything's political, because actually
I don't want to know what our celebrities,
but that's the thing. Why do they feel the need, whether it's musicians, whether it's Hollywood celebrities, whether it's anyone, any another person on the telly, why do they think we need to know their views? But the key thing here is, people say this isn't about silencing people, or I'm always told, oh, I thought you were a free speecher. It's not absolute. You can't libel people. You can't threaten people. But also, we have established we are required by law, under threat of being sent to prison if we don't pay the fine and pay for the licence fee, to pay a tax, effectively, which is what the licence fee is if you own a television in this country, whether you watch the BBC or not, to pay for the BBC. And the deal for that is that people on the BBC are supposed to maintain political neutrality. I don't think it's a big ask.
It's not a big ask, but I mean, if anyone truly believes that the BBC is adhering to its impartiality rules today, I mean, it just goes to the whole thing is actually quite a nonsense. But my concern is they've got a big public platform because of their TV presence, not because of their intellectual acumen, and yet they're using those platforms to unfairly influence people based upon lack of knowledge. Because, she was a glorified mathematician who actually had an earpiece in her ear most of the time she was doing.
No, she's an intelligent woman.
Well, but this is a woman who had that job since the age of 21. She's no more qualified to speak about this than anybody is, but she has a unique platform, along with Gary Lineker and others, and they're using that to actually spout information not from a position of authority. And that's my problem.
And yet they do have the air of authority because they're employed by the BBC.
That's it.
And this is the thing with Gary Lineker. What about people who say, look, we are talking about people who present a show. I mean, I'm assuming they play music and you say chit-chat about the weather. Gary Lineker, he's a superb football pundit. He's a superb host. I love watching him when he's hosting, big, World Cup matches, and he's an easy watch. He's really good at that. He was a really good footballer. Remember that. And he sells crisps quite well, apparently, as well. But he seems to have the most sort of kindergarten level knowledge of politics.
And that's my issue. But there's also the division again. I used to really enjoy Alan Partridge. I can't watch it now because I know Steve Coogan loathes me. and he knows that people like me. I can't watch a Hugh Grant film anymore. And that's my great issue. You know, I took the tube yesterday, and across from me was one of Sadiq Khan's latest anti-British poems, all about the empire. I thought, I can't even take a tube ride without having my journey politicised. And that's the problem. Everything has become so divisive.
Philip Ingram, that was one of the things the BBC was supposed to hold this role that was, like the monarchy, are supposed to be above politics, somewhere to go where you'd expect neutrality. I mean, let's face it, it's laughable to claim it's neutral. Does the BBC have to enforce these rules? Should they enforce them more strongly on people like Gary Lineker, or should they just abandon any pretence that they're politically neutral, especially as we've seen with their reporting of, you know, the Hamas attack and refusing to say they are terrorists?
I think that the channels are not just there informing, they're influencing as well.
Yeah.
And when you get influencers who are paid so much money and paid out of the public purse so much money, they have to realise that influencing by soundbite, where using potty mouth tactics in many cases is just wrong. Now, that's been politically set by members of Parliament in using hate or potty mouth type language. If they want to get into
scum when you're
exactly, if they want to get involved in politics, argue articulately, come at things from a position of knowledge, and put your
play the ball,
your real argument out there. Exactly.
Avoid ad hominem, and that's been the problem, I think, a lot with a lot of what we've seen from Carol Vorderman and others.
Yeah. Also, I've got a lot of it, as we see again, it's like the people calling for a ceasefire in Israel. You know, it's really easy virtue signalling. It's simplistic, sixth form politics, virtue signalling. It doesn't actually get to grips with the difficulties of
I think
life.
It's fine to make those comments as long as you pass a 10-point test beforehand.
Yeah.
Do you actually understand the issues? If you do, then you can comment.
Yeah, oh, no, we're going to have rules like that. I don't know. I think it's like, it's very, very simple. You want to work at the BBC, that's the deal. I can't get a job at the BBC. Not that I want one, but I know, I've been told categorically, you'll never be able to work at the BBC. I get blackballed from comedy shows that I used to appear on because of my political views, just as a guest. And, I mean, it's just extraordinary. But their views, because they're considered to be the acceptable views of the BBC, they can pass muster for a long time. And again, we've seen these new rules come out of the BBC about social media. Apparently don't apply to Gary Lineker, but they do apply to Carol Vorderman. But there we are. Do stay with us. I've got to get your thoughts on the responses that have been coming in thick and fast to my question to you today. It's about Home Secretary Suella Braverman accusing the Met Police of playing favourites with protesters after they refused to ban the pro-Palestinian march on Armistice Day. Do you agree with her? Tell us what you think. Well, Joseph has texted in to say, yes, we can compare protests where they are concerned about sensitivities to ones where they aren't, and the way they go about policing them. BLM, Black Lives Matter, during lockdown versus an anti-lockdown protest, for example. Mark has tweeted in to say, yes, he agrees with her, the next Iron Lady. And Chris says the police have adopted two-tier policing, favouring lefty woke causes and pandering to groups they're fearful of, but coming down hard on just causes. Do keep your responses coming in. Thank you very much indeed for all of those. It's amazing. I don't think we've had any responses where people have actually disagreed with what Suella Braverman had to say. And Douglas Murray was on the show a little bit earlier, and he was saying, look, she's not out. I was saying, quoting one caller who said, she's saying the quiet bit out loud. And he's saying, no, she's saying the sensible bit, saying the stuff out loud that everyone's thinking. And that's where we come back to the BBC, don't we, Rafe? Where, the BBC has this idea of what the view is of the country, like on things like Brexit, on immigration, on things like that. And they're wildly out of touch with people.
But it's not just the BBC. We've even seen Tory MPs so out of touch that they've been condemning Suella Braverman. Across all of our institutions, we've seen them captured over the last 25 years, and it's just going to show the disconnect that exists between the mainstream population and between the elite. I mean, for example, we know
the elite look, I'm ostensibly Philip. I live in North London. I go to the dinner parties. I'm part of the mainstream Oxbridge elite and everything. And I do find it strange how many people don't seem to understand just how so many policies, so many decisions are made, how they affect people living their daily lives.
I think there's a fundamental problem in society at the minute, and a lot of it's enabled by what we do online. Comment, politics, protest and policing is all done by soundbite now, not substance.
Yeah, and that is a big issue, isn't it?
But a real issue also is people who in power don't see on their daily lives the things that the average person sees. So they don't have any experience of these protests. They don't have any experience of the lack of a police presence. And that's why it's not real to them.
They don't live with it, quite right. Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, thank you so much for joining us. Hope you'll come on the show again. Philip Ingram, absolute pleasure having you joining us all this morning, giving your thoughts on all the biggest stories. Of course, we'll wait and see what does happen with that march on Saturday.